In a room that could have been mistaken for a five-star hotel suite, the hospital buzzed quietly around Isabella Kingstone, the billionaire's only daughter. The walls were lined with expensive paintings, and soft lights illuminated the room as if it were designed for a queen. Yet, in the bed, Isabella lay unconscious, pale and still. Her once vibrant face had turned ghostly white, and her breathing was shallow. The beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound filling the room, as if it too was holding its breath in anticipation. Isabella was only 24, with a life full of possibilities ahead of her. A life that had been filled with luxury, the best schools, and trips around the world. But none of that mattered now. None of her father's wealth, none of her family's status, could do anything to save her. She had been fighting a mysterious illness for the past week, and no one seemed to know what was wrong. Doctors from all over the city had come to examine her, but none could give a clear answer. The symptoms were strange, too strange, even for the top specialists to identify. Her father, Mr. Samuel Kingstone, stood by the window, staring out at the city skyline. He had built an empire from the ground up. Hard work, deals, and an unyielding focus on success had made him one of the wealthiest men in the world. Yet, as he looked out over his vast empire, he realized there was nothing he could do to save his daughter. His heart felt like it was slowly sinking, and it had been this way for days. He glanced over at Isabella's bed, his eyes filled with pain. His hands were trembling as he ran them through his salt and pepper hair. How had it come to this? He had done everything for her, provided her with everything she could have ever wanted, but now, he felt like a failure. What good was wealth if it couldn't save the one person who mattered most in his life? Isabella, he whispered, his voice breaking. Please, don't leave me. He turned back to the hospital staff, who were gathered at the foot of her bed. They were exchanging worried glances, speaking in hushed tones, none of them able to offer any hope. The room felt cold, and despite the high-tech medical equipment around her, Isabella seemed farther away than ever. Mr. Kingstone, we're doing everything we can, Dr. Miller said, looking up from his clipboard. His face was etched with concern. He was one of the top doctors in the country, but even he seemed unsure of the next steps. Her body is rejecting the treatment, and we don't know why. It's as if her immune system is turning against her. Then find out why. Mr. Kingstone snapped, his voice rising with frustration. He took a deep breath, trying to regain control. I don't care about the cost. Just save her. Dr. Miller nodded solemnly, but even his words couldn't offer any reassurance. The truth was, no one knew how to save Isabella. She had deteriorated so quickly that they were all at a loss. The doctors could only monitor her condition and hope for a miracle. But it was clear to everyone in the room that the miracle they needed was nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, in the corner of the room, Maria, the maid, stood silently by the door. She had been with the Kingstone family for years, looking after Isabella since she was a little girl. She wasn't just a maid, she was family, in a way. Maria had watched Isabella grow up, and her heart broke every time she saw the young woman in this condition. The coldness of the sterile hospital room felt like a far cry from the warmth of the family mansion. Maria had always been quiet, keeping to the background as she went about her work. She wasn't one to draw attention to herself, but today, something felt different. She had been moving in and out of the room, tending to small details like adjusting the curtains and tidying up, but her mind was elsewhere. Every time she looked at Isabella, her heart sank a little more. It was clear that the girl was fighting for her life, but Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As she stepped closer to the bed to adjust the blanket, Maria couldn't help but overhear the conversation between the nurses at the far end of the room. Their voices were low, but Maria had always been good at picking up on small details. She paused, straining to hear. I told them the 4 fluids were delayed, one nurse said. I'm sure they're fine, but "But what?" the second nurse asked. I don't know. It's a little strange that they're not responding like they should," the first nurse replied. "The solution is supposed to help her immune system, but it's not. There's something off." Maria's breath caught in her throat. She had always been the quiet observer, but something about their words felt like a warning. She glanced over at Isabella, whose condition hadn't improved in hours. The young woman's eyes were closed, her delicate face pale and fragile, like a flower wilting in the sun. Something wasn't right, and Maria felt it deep in her bones. She had no medical training, but she had worked in hospitals for years, seen enough to know when something was wrong. Her instincts screamed at her that this was more than just a simple illness. Something was off. And she was going to find out what it was. Maria had always been in the background of the Kingstone household. To the outside world, she was just the maid, the one who dusted the furniture and made sure the house was spotless. But to the Kingstons, she was family. She had watched Isabella grow from a curious little girl into the beautiful, intelligent young woman lying in the hospital bed, fighting for her life. As she quietly moved around the hospital room, tidying up and adjusting things here and there, Maria's thoughts were far away. Her mind was racing, replaying the conversation she had overheard between the nurses. "Something's off," they had said. The fluid wasn't working like it should. The more Maria thought about it, the more uneasy she became. She had worked in various medical settings in the past: hospitals, clinics, even homes for the elderly. While she was no doctor, she had picked up enough over the years to know when something wasn't right. She had seen her fair share of patients being treated with medicines and fluids that seemed to make them worse rather than better. But this was different. She watched as Dr. Miller and his team of specialists huddled together near the door, talking in hushed voices. Mr. Kingstone stood near the window, his back turned to the room, as if he couldn't bear to watch his daughter's suffering any longer. The faint beeping of the heart monitor and the soft hum of the air conditioning were the only sounds in the room. It felt as if time had stopped. Maria couldn't stand it. She couldn't just stand by and do nothing. Isabella was like a daughter to her. In a way, Maria had raised her. She had been there when Isabella had learned to walk, when she had scraped her knee, and when she had come home from school with a broken heart after her first fight with a friend. Maria had been there through it all, always in the background, always quiet, always caring. But now, Isabella needed her, more than ever. Turning her head towards the foredrip that hung by Isabella's bed, Maria's heart skipped a beat. She had been watching it closely, and something about the steady drip of the fluid felt wrong. It wasn't the usual saline solution that she had seen so many times before. This fluid was different. The color was off, a faint tint that she couldn't quite place. It wasn't the bright, clear liquid she expected to see. It was murky, almost like it had been tainted with something else. Maria's hands trembled as she approached the forestand. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the plastic tubing, her mind screaming to take action, but her body frozen in place. Could she really be imagining this? Was it possible that the nurses had made a mistake, or was something much more sinister going on? Her eyes flicked back to Isabella's face, now even paler than before. The girl's pulse was weak, her breathing shallow. Maria swallowed hard. She had to act. She couldn't let her go like this. She turned and walked swiftly towards the door, her shoes tapping softly against the polished floor. She needed to find answers, and she needed them fast. Maria wasn't one to cause trouble, but this was Isabella's life on the line. Her gut told her that something was wrong, something dangerous, and she couldn't just ignore it. The nurse's station was just down the hall. Maria's heart raced as she walked quickly, her mind filled with nothing but worry for Isabella. She had never been one to make a scene, but now, she felt like she had no choice. She approached the nurse's station, trying to calm her nerves. "Nurse, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to speak with Dr. Miller. It's about the 4 fluids." The nurse looked up, surprised to see Maria standing there. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking nervously around the room. "Is there a problem, Maria?" she asked cautiously. Maria nodded, her voice shaking as she spoke. "I think something's wrong with the fluids. The one they're giving Isabella, it doesn't look right." The nurse's face remained unreadable, but Maria could see a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "What do you mean?" the nurse asked, her tone not quite as dismissive as it might have been earlier. "I've seen enough 4 fluids in my life to know when something's off," Maria said quietly. "The one they're giving Isabella, it's wrong. It's not the usual clear saline. It's tinted, like it's been tampered with. And it's not helping her, she's getting worse." The nurse frowned, but Maria could see she wasn't convinced. "I'll let Dr. Miller know," she said, and Maria nodded gratefully. As the nurse walked away, Maria returned to the hospital room. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew that she had to be the one to speak up. As she entered the room, she felt a sense of urgency. She glanced at Isabella, who lay motionless, her skin looking almost translucent. Mr. Kingstone was still standing by the window, lost in thought. Maria's eyes landed on the 4 drip again, and for a moment, she felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Without another word, she marched up to the bed, grabbed the 4 line, and started to pull it out. "Stop," she called to the doctor and nurses. "Stop this. She's being poisoned." The room went silent. Every pair of eyes turned to Maria, who was now standing in front of Isabella, her hands shaking but her voice strong. The nurse who had spoken with her earlier entered, her face pale. "I know this may seem crazy," Maria continued, her voice shaking slightly, "but I'm sure the fluids are poisoned. And if you don't stop them, she'll die." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as Maria stood by Isabella's bedside, holding the 4 line in her trembling hands. The doctors and nurses around her exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to react to her sudden outburst. Maria's heart pounded in her chest, but she wasn't going to back down. Isabella was her responsibility now. The girl who had once called her Aunt Maria was slipping away, and Maria wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. "I'm serious," Maria said, her voice shaking but resolute. "This 4 fluid is poison. I've seen enough in my life to know when something isn't right. If you don't stop it now, she'll die." Dr. Miller, the lead doctor, was the first to react. He walked up to Maria, his face a mixture of confusion and frustration. "Maria, we appreciate your concern, but you're not a medical professional. You don't know what you're talking about." Maria shook her head, her eyes never leaving Isabella's pale face. "I may not have a medical degree, but I've seen this before. I know what poison looks like. And I know this isn't just some saline solution." Her voice wavered with emotion, but her determination never wavered. Mr. Kingstone, who had been standing quietly by the window, turned to face the scene unfolding before him. He had heard Maria's words, but part of him still couldn't believe it. His mind raced, struggling to understand what was happening. Poison. How could that be? The hospital had the best doctors, the most advanced equipment. But what if Maria was right? What if something was wrong? "Maria," Mr. Kingstone's voice broke through the tension in the room. He had to clear his throat before he could speak again. "Are you sure about this? Are you absolutely sure?" Maria didn't hesitate. "Yes. I've seen enough in my time working in hospitals to know when something is wrong. There's no time to waste. You have to stop it." Dr. Miller hesitated for a moment, but then he gestured to the nurse standing nearby. "Get a sample of the fluid," he ordered, though his voice carried an undertone of reluctance. The nurse quickly moved to comply, though Maria could see the doubt still lingering in the doctor's eyes. I don't know what you think you're doing, Dr. Miller continued, trying to regain control of the situation. But you need to understand, we're trying everything to save her. If this is some kind of mistake, it's not a mistake, Maria interrupted, her voice sharper now. And if you don't stop that fluid, it'll be too late. I've watched her condition deteriorate in front of me. It's because of this, she gestured to the four. Please, listen to me. The nurse returned to the room with a small vial of the fluid from the four bag, her hands shaking slightly. Dr. Miller took the vial from her, inspecting it closely under the bright hospital lights. Maria watched him carefully, her gaze unwavering. For a moment, everything was still. Dr. Miller's brow furrowed as he examined the fluid. It didn't look quite like the saline solution he had expected. It was faintly tinted, a pale yellow hue that had no place in a medical treatment. His face slowly began to change, the skepticism replaced by growing concern. Is it possible? Dr. Miller mumbled to himself, then looked up at the nurse. Test it? Now. The nurse immediately rushed to the lab to run a quick test. The tension in the room grew thicker with each passing second. Maria stayed close to Isabella's side, unwilling to leave her for even a moment. Mr. Kingstone stood frozen, watching the unfolding drama with a mix of disbelief and fear. The minutes dragged on as they waited. Dr. Miller stood by, his arms crossed, his expression one of deep thought. It was clear that he was troubled, but he was still holding on to some semblance of hope that this was all just a misunderstanding. After all, it couldn't be true. A poison in the hospital's four-line? It seemed too far-fetched. Finally, the nurse returned, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. She handed Dr. Miller the results, which he quickly scanned. A moment later, he looked up, his face drained of color. It's poison, he said quietly, his voice hoarse. It's a slow-acting toxin, but if we hadn't stopped it, he trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Maria felt a wave of relief rush over her, but there was no time for celebration. Isabella was still in critical condition. The poison had already started to take effect, and the clock was ticking. Mr. Kingstone's face went ashen, his worst fears realized. He had seen it all now, the proof. Maria had been right, and the doctors had been wrong. He hadn't wanted to believe it, but now he couldn't ignore it. His heart ached as he turned to Maria. Thank you, he whispered, his voice breaking. Thank you for saving her. I don't know what I would have done without you. Maria simply nodded, her eyes never leaving Isabella's face. We're not out of the woods yet. We need to act quickly. Get her stabilized. Dr. Miller immediately called for a team to start the treatment to reverse the poison's effects. The nurses worked quickly, administering antidotes and ensuring that the four-line was replaced with the proper fluids. Isabella's heart rate was still dangerously low, but the medical staff was now working with purpose, their faces focused and determined. As the hours passed, Maria refused to leave Isabella's side. She held the girl's hand, silently praying for her recovery. Mr. Kingstone, still in shock, paced the room, his mind racing. How had this happened? Who would want to harm his daughter? And why? As the antidote began to take effect, Isabella's condition slowly started to improve. Her breathing became steadier, her skin regained a hint of color, and the faint beeping of the heart monitor began to sound more reassuring. But the danger wasn't over. Not yet. Maria remained vigilant, her eyes never leaving Isabella's face. She wasn't about to let her guard down, not now. As long as Isabella was still fighting, Maria would fight alongside her. The hours that followed were tense and filled with uncertainty. As the antidote began to work, Isabella's condition seemed to stabilize, but she was far from out of danger. The doctors and nurses worked in quiet urgency, checking her vitals and adjusting the flow of the life-saving fluids. Mr. Kingstone stood near the window, watching them, his face drawn and pale, the weight of the events pressing heavily on his shoulders. Maria stayed close to Isabella, her hand gently holding the young woman's. She watched her every move, never leaving her side. She couldn't help but feel the tight knot in her chest loosen as Isabella's breathing became steadier, more even. But there was no time for relief, not yet. The poison had already taken its toll, and it would take time for Isabella's body to fully recover. Mr. Kingstone's mind raced with questions. Who could have done this? Why would anyone want to harm his daughter? He had spent so many years building his empire, fighting against competitors, and navigating the ruthless world of business, but never had he thought he would have to fight for his daughter's life in such a way. His thoughts turned dark, and for the first time in years, he felt completely helpless. The hospital room, once filled with medical equipment, now felt strangely silent except for the quiet beeping of the heart monitor and the low murmur of the nurses. Everything felt suspended, as if time itself had slowed to a crawl. "Maria," Mr. Kingstone's voice broke through the stillness. He turned to look at the maid, his eyes filled with gratitude and disbelief. "You were right. If you hadn't noticed the fluid. If you hadn't stopped them, his words trailed off, as if he couldn't bear to finish the thought. Maria's gaze remained fixed on Isabella's face. She squeezed her hand gently, a reassuring gesture. "I don't want to think about it," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We still have time to make sure she's okay." Mr. Kingstone nodded, though his heart was heavy. He couldn't understand how something like this could happen in a hospital, where the best medical staff and equipment were supposed to protect his daughter. Someone had done this on purpose, and that thought alone sent a shiver down his spine. But the mystery wasn't just about how Isabella had been poisoned, it was about why. Why had someone wanted to hurt her? What had she done to deserve this? His mind began to race again, going through the people in his life, the business rivals, even the staff at the mansion. Who could it be? Who had the motive to harm his precious daughter? Suddenly, the door to the hospital room creaked open, and Dr. Miller walked in, his face serious. He glanced at Isabella, then turned his attention to Maria and Mr. Kingstone. "We've completed the initial treatment," he said, his voice clipped. "Her vitals are stable for now, but the next few hours are critical. We'll need to keep her under close observation. The poison was potent, and we can't predict how her body will respond." Mr. Kingstone nodded, though a small part of him still refused to believe what had happened. His daughter was going to be fine. She had to be. He wouldn't let anything take her from him. Dr. Miller paused, taking a deep breath. "I know you're both upset, but we need to address what happened. This wasn't an accident. Someone deliberately poisoned her." Maria's heart skipped a beat at his words. She hadn't wanted to say it out loud, but now it was official. Someone had done this on purpose. She glanced at Mr. Kingstone, her heart heavy with the knowledge that the situation was even worse than they had imagined. "Have you found anything?" Mr. Kingstone's voice was tight, his jaw clenched in anger. "Who did this?" Dr. Miller shook his head. "We're still running tests on the poison, trying to trace it back. But the symptoms suggest that this wasn't something that happened by chance. This was planned. We've already notified the authorities." The words hit like a hammer. Mr. Kingstone's mind reeled with the implications. The very idea that someone could target his daughter in such a personal way sent a cold rage through him. He clenched his fists, fighting the urge to lash out, to demand answers. But he had to stay calm. "For Isabella." "Thank you, Dr. Miller," Mr. Kingstone said through gritted teeth. "Please keep us updated on her condition." Dr. Miller nodded. "Of course, Mr. Kingstone. We'll do everything we can." As the doctor left, the tension in the room seemed to multiply. Mr. Kingstone looked down at his daughter, still unconscious, but breathing steadily now. He felt a pang of guilt in his chest. Was this his fault? Had he been too focused on his work, too distant from his family? Could he have seen the signs, done something earlier to protect her? Maria's voice broke through his thoughts. Mr. Kingstone, this is not your fault. We don't know who did this or why, but you can't blame yourself. We'll find out what happened, and we'll make sure she's safe. Mr. Kingstone met her gaze, his eyes filled with both gratitude and uncertainty. You're right. But I won't rest until I find the person responsible. They'll pay for what they've done to her. Maria nodded solemnly. I'm with you. We'll figure this out together. As the minutes stretched into hours, Maria stayed by Isabella's side, watching her closely, making sure she was breathing steadily. Mr. Kingstone, despite his overwhelming worry, seemed to settle into the rhythm of the room, his thoughts now fully focused on the mystery of who had poisoned his daughter. For the first time since Isabella had been brought in, the room felt a little lighter. The worst of the danger had passed, and now they had to find out who had tried to take everything from them. As the night wore on, the atmosphere in the hospital room remained thick with unease. Isabella had been stable for hours, but the question that had haunted everyone who had poisoned her and why remained unanswered. Mr. Kingstone paced the room, his mind a whirl of emotions. His anger, frustration, and confusion were now channeled into a single, burning desire, to find the person responsible for putting his daughter in harm's way. Maria remained by Isabella's side, her steady presence offering the only comfort in the room. She refused to leave, not even for a moment, her eyes never leaving the young woman she had come to care for like her own child. Despite the fact that Isabella was now breathing steadily, Maria could still sense the shadow of danger lingering in the air. The poison had done its damage, and no one knew just how long it would take for Isabella to fully recover or if the damage had already been done. Mr. Kingstone paused near the window, staring out into the night. The city lights below seemed so far away, almost like they belonged to a different world. His empire, his wealth, his power, all of it had been built on the foundation of control. But here, in this sterile hospital room, he had none. He couldn't control the situation, couldn't fix it with money or influence. For the first time in years, he felt completely helpless. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Dr. Miller stepped in, his expression grave. Mr. Kingstone, Maria, he began, his voice low. I have an update. Mr. Kingstone straightened, his eyes narrowing. What is it? We've run some tests on the poison, and we've traced it back to a rare toxin, Dr. Miller explained. It's used in very specific cases, mostly for assassination attempts. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Maria's blood ran cold at the doctor's words. Assassination. The idea that someone had tried to kill Isabella was almost too much to bear. But there was no time to dwell on the horror of it. They had to act fast, and they had to act carefully. Assassination. Mr. Kingstone repeated, disbelief creeping into his voice. Who would want to kill my daughter? She's done nothing to deserve this. Dr. Miller shook his head. We don't know yet, Mr. Kingstone. But we'll find out. The authorities are investigating, and we've alerted the security team here. They're reviewing the hospital's records to track down anyone who may have had access to her four fluids. Mr. Kingstone clenched his fists, his jaw tight. He was furious at whoever had done this, and furious at himself for not being more vigilant. He'd been so focused on his business, so wrapped up in his world of meetings and deals, that he had failed to see the danger lurking so close to home. Maria spoke softly, her voice steady but filled with concern. Isabella will pull through. She's strong. But we need to know who did this. We can't just sit here and wait for answers. Dr. Miller nodded. I agree. But for now, we must focus on her recovery. We've got the antidote working, but we still need to monitor her closely. The poison was designed to slow the heart rate and weaken the body. It's going to take time before she's back to her old self, if she ever truly will be. As the doctor spoke, Maria couldn't help but feel the weight of his words. Isabella had always been full of life, so vibrant and full of energy. To think that someone could take that away from her in an instant was unthinkable. Maria's heart clenched at the thought of the young woman, once so full of laughter and warmth, now lying motionless in that bed. "We'll do everything we can to help her," Dr. Miller added, as if reading Maria's mind. "But we need your help, too. We need everyone's cooperation if we're going to figure out who did this." Maria nodded, her resolve hardening. She wasn't going to wait around for answers. She was going to find out who was behind this herself. She had seen enough in her life to know when something was wrong, and she wasn't about to let anyone get away with harming someone she cared for. "I'll do whatever it takes," Maria said quietly. "I'll talk to the staff, the nurses, anyone who might have seen something. Whoever did this won't get away with it." Mr. Kingstone turned to Maria, his face filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Maria. I don't know what I'd do without you." Maria gave a small, tight smile. "You don't have to thank me. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do." With that, she stood up from the chair and walked toward the door. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't just sit back and wait. Isabella's life was on the line, and there was no time to waste. As Maria made her way through the hospital corridors, she felt a mix of determination and fear. She wasn't trained to be a detective, but she knew how to observe, how to ask the right questions, and how to dig deeper. Her instincts had never steered her wrong before, and she wasn't going to let them down now. She started by talking to the nurses who had been working in Isabella's room that day. They seemed nervous, avoiding her gaze as she asked about the 4 fluids and whether anyone had noticed anything unusual. But Maria wasn't fooled. She could see the fear in their eyes, the way they hesitated before answering. Something was off. One of the nurses, a young woman named Claire, finally spoke up in a hushed voice. "I didn't think anything was strange at first," she admitted. "But I remember seeing a man come in earlier that day. He was wearing a coat, looked like he was here for a meeting or something. I thought he was just one of the hospital's vendors, but now I'm not so sure." Maria's heart raced as she processed the information. A man. She had a name. A lead. "Did he say who he was?" Maria asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Claire shook her head. "No. He just passed by, and I didn't think anything of it. I didn't even get a good look at his face. But it was enough. It was something to go on." Maria thanked Claire and quickly made her way to the security office, hoping they had footage from the hospital's cameras. She needed to see this man for herself. As she walked toward the security office, her mind raced. Who was he? Was he the one responsible for poisoning Isabella? What was his connection to the Kingstone family? Maria wasn't sure yet, but she knew one thing for certain: she was getting closer. Maria's footsteps echoed in the quiet hospital hallway as she made her way to the security office. She had spoken to the nurse, Claire, and now had a name, a lead. The man Claire had seen walking past Isabella's room earlier that day was the key to unlocking the mystery of who had poisoned her. The thought of him lingered in Maria's mind as she quickened her pace. She could feel the weight of the task ahead, but the sense of urgency was what pushed her forward. There was no time to waste. Every second counted. The security office was tucked away in a corner of the hospital, almost hidden from the main foot traffic. It felt strangely quiet when Maria entered, the soft hum of the monitors the only sound. The security officer behind the desk looked up, his expression indifferent at first. "Can I help you?" he asked, eyeing her with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "I need to see the footage from earlier today," Maria said, her voice calm but firm. "There was a man who came through the hospital. He might have information about something that happened in room 306. The officer paused, his eyes narrowing. Room 306. You mean Isabella Kingstone's room? Maria nodded, her heart racing. Yes. I have reason to believe this man might be involved in something very serious. The officer hesitated but then motioned for her to sit down. All right. I'll pull it up. But I'll need your authorization. Maria quickly explained the situation, her voice steady as she detailed the poisoning and the suspicion that someone had deliberately targeted Isabella. The officer seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, his demeanor changing as he started typing into the system. Minutes later, he turned the screen towards Maria. This is the footage from earlier. You can watch it here. Maria's eyes locked onto the screen as the footage began to play. She watched carefully, her breath held as the camera angle shifted to a hallway outside Isabella's room. There, in the frame, was the man Claire had described, tall, wearing a dark coat, moving quickly down the corridor. His face was partially obscured by the collar of his jacket, but there was no mistaking his confident stride. He appeared to glance toward Isabella's room as he passed, but he didn't stop. Maria's pulse quickened as she leaned in closer to the screen. She needed more than just a glimpse of him, she needed to know who he was, and why he had been in that part of the hospital. She pointed at the screen. Can you zoom in on his face? The officer nodded and clicked a few buttons, enhancing the image. For a moment, the image was blurry, but then it sharpened, revealing the man's features more clearly. Maria's breath caught as she recognized something familiar in his face. He was someone she had seen before, though she couldn't quite place where. The man was not a stranger, he was connected to the Kingstone family in some way. Who is this? Maria asked, her voice barely a whisper. The officer leaned in, squinting at the screen. I've seen him around. I think he's a part of one of the business dealings Mr. Kingstone has been involved in recently. You might want to talk to him directly. Maria's heart skipped a beat. The man wasn't just some random person, he was someone with ties to Mr. Kingstone. That meant he had access to Isabella, possibly even the opportunity to poison her. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but there was still so much more to uncover. Thank you, Maria said, standing up and turning toward the door. This helps more than you know. As she left the security office, her mind raced. She now had a name, a possible connection to the poisoner, but she needed more information. She needed to find out everything she could about this man and how he was connected to Isabella's life. Who was he really, and what had driven him to commit such an awful act? Meanwhile, back in Isabella's room, Mr. Kingstone was still by his daughter's side, trying to wrap his mind around the events of the past few hours. The hospital staff had assured him that Isabella was stable for the moment, but every time he looked at her, he felt the weight of the danger still hovering over her. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. Someone had tried to kill her, and no matter how hard he tried to deny it, he knew that the person responsible was still out there. The door creaked open, and Dr. Miller stepped inside, his expression more serious than ever. Mr. Kingstone, we need to talk. Mr. Kingstone stood up quickly, his eyes hard. What is it, doctor? Dr. Miller glanced over at Isabella, who was still unconscious, her breathing steady but shallow. It's about the poison. We've been in touch with the authorities, and we've learned something troubling. The toxin that was used, it's rare. In fact, it's almost impossible to get unless you're connected to the right people. Mr. Kingstone's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean, connected? Dr. Miller hesitated before answering. It's used in certain circles, corporate espionage, high-stakes criminal activity. It's not something that would just show up in a hospital by accident. Mr. Kingstone's mind began to race. Corporate espionage? Criminal activity? That didn't sound like something his daughter would ever be involved in. But as the pieces started to fall into place, he realized something unsettling. His business dealings were complex, and he had made enemies along the way. Had someone been trying to send him a message by hurting Isabella? Was she the target because of him? Is there a way to trace who could have used this toxin? Mr. Kingstone asked, his voice tight with barely contained anger. Dr. Miller nodded. We're already looking into it. The authorities are handling it now, but it's going to take time. They'll need to go through records, speak with anyone who had access to her four fluids. It's a long process, but we'll get answers. Mr. Kingstone clenched his fists. Not fast enough. I'll find out who did this. I won't rest until I do. As Maria continued her investigation, her resolve strengthened. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became, someone close to the family had betrayed them. And whoever it was, they wouldn't get away with it. She was determined to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. In the coming hours, the hunt for the person responsible would take a dangerous turn, and Maria would have to decide how far she was willing to go to protect Isabella and bring justice to the one who had tried to destroy everything they held dear. The night was quiet, but the tension in the hospital seemed to stretch endlessly. Maria sat next to Isabella's bed, her fingers gently gripping the young woman's hand. The antidote had done its work for now, but Isabella's recovery wasn't guaranteed. The poison had ravaged her body, and no one could be sure how much damage had been done. All Maria could do was stay close, offering silent support, and wait for the doctors to give the word that it was over, that Isabella would pull through. Mr. Kingstone had left the room hours ago, saying he needed to take care of some things. Maria knew he was likely on the phone, making calls, trying to figure out how someone could have gotten access to Isabella's four fluids and poisoned her. His mind was working in overdrive, and she could sense the weight of the burden on him. He was a man who had built an empire from the ground up, but all of that power had not been enough to protect his only daughter. Maria herself was no stranger to pain. She had seen more than her share of suffering in her years working as a maid for the Kingstone family. But this was different. This was a betrayal she could not understand. Who could have done this to Isabella? Who had access to her life, and why would anyone want to harm her? Meanwhile, Mr. Kingstone was sitting in a small, dimly lit office on the hospital's lower floor. His face was grave, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. The security footage had led him to the name of the man who had been in the hospital that fateful day. He had spoken to a few of the hospital staff and found out that the man had been connected to a business deal from years ago, one that had gone sour. The name was familiar now, and Mr. Kingstone's stomach churned with the realization that this man had once been a close associate. Darren Wills, Mr. Kingstone muttered to himself, as though saying the name aloud might bring some kind of clarity. Darren Wills had been a business partner, a man who had worked with him on several major projects. But a few years ago, their relationship had soured. A deal had fallen through, one that had cost Mr. Kingstone a considerable amount of money, and Wills had disappeared from the scene. Now, it seemed, he had returned in the worst way possible. The door to the office opened, and Dr. Miller walked in, his expression grave. Mr. Kingstone, we've had a breakthrough. We've managed to trace the toxin back to a very specific source. The vendor who supplied the four fluids, the same one who supplied Isabella's last batch, is connected to a few other suppliers who've been under investigation for similar incidents in the past. Mr. Kingstone's jaw tightened. So it's not just a random act. Someone intentionally planted the poison. Dr. Miller nodded. It seems that way. The authorities are investigating it now, but we're certain it was intentional. We've also checked the security footage, and Darren Wills was definitely seen on the premises that day. He had access to the area, and he was close enough to have tampered with the four fluids. Mr. Kingstone stood up, his anger rising. Wills. He's the one who did this. He's the one who tried to kill my daughter. Back in Isabella's room, Maria's thoughts raced as she watched the steady rise and fall of Isabella's chest. Every hour that passed felt like a small victory, but Maria knew that the real battle was far from over. She had spent the last few hours piecing together what she had learned, and the pieces were slowly coming together. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was personal. Someone had targeted Isabella, and that person was someone Mr. Kingstone had once trusted. Just as Maria was lost in her thoughts, the door opened, and Mr. Kingstone walked in. His face was a mask of controlled rage, but his eyes told a different story, one of deep pain and betrayal. Maria stood as he entered the room, a sense of dread settling over her. She knew something had changed. "It's him," Mr. Kingstone said, his voice tied with fury. "Darren Wills. He's the one who did this. He's been working with a supplier who has a history of dealing in toxic substances. And he was here on the day Isabella was poisoned. He had access to her room." Maria's heart sank. She had suspected that someone close to the family was involved, but hearing it confirmed was still a blow. But why? Why would he do this? What could he possibly gain by hurting Isabella? Mr. Kingstone paced the room, his frustration mounting. "I don't know, Maria. I really don't. But this goes deeper than I ever imagined. Wills and I had a falling out years ago, but I never thought it would come to this." Maria's eyes narrowed as a thought crossed her mind. "You think he was trying to send you a message? Hurt you through your daughter?" Mr. Kingstone stopped pacing, his eyes locked on Maria. "Yes. That's exactly what I think. I'm sure of it now. He knew that Isabella was my weakness, and he took advantage of that. He used her to get to me." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. The thought of someone using Isabella like a pawn in a twisted game of revenge was almost too much to bear. But there was one thing that still didn't make sense. But how did he get the poison into the four? Who else was involved? Mr. Kingstone sighed heavily. "That's what we're going to find out. The authorities are already looking into it. They'll get to the bottom of it, and they'll make sure Wills pays for what he's done. No one hurts my daughter and gets away with it." As the hours stretched into the morning, Maria and Mr. Kingstone stayed by Isabella's side. The investigation was well underway, and the police had already started gathering evidence. There was no question now Darren Wills was responsible, and he would face the consequences of his actions. Isabella remained unconscious, but there was hope. The antidote had worked. The poison was no longer in her system. The only thing left was time and the hope that her body could heal from the damage it had suffered. Maria sat quietly in the chair beside the bed, her eyes fixed on Isabella's face. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain: no matter what happened, she would never leave Isabella's side. She would fight for her just as she had always done.